Welcome to the Strategy Led Podcast. Today I'm going to start with maybe a little bit of a rant, but I think it's something that needs to be said. There is just so much lazy and useless content out there right now about ChatGPT and other AI tools. And in my opinion, pretty much most media out there is fairly useless. The only good places to turn to are social media and podcasts to learn about how to use these tools. How many articles have you read that have something of this framework? Some big clickbait headline about AI not taking jobs, or exploiting copyright law, or hitting 100 million users, anything just to get you in, followed by a fairly generic overview of the situation without really getting into any detail. They'll have their kind of caveat paragraph, which says that AI won't take anyone's jobs, but it'll help people to work more efficiently. And then it'll close the article with a fairly open question or generic statement. Now, to me, that right now is just absolutely useless. It doesn't help anyone. All it literally does is get people in and waste their time, and probably gets a click for whatever media organization that's coming from. But right now, what people need is information so that they can make good decisions for themselves. No one's approach is going to be fully right or fully wrong. There's just too much change going on. But the value people need is from content that goes in depth. And there's just nowhere near enough of that available right now, which is why today I want to start kind of a series of places where we go in deep on different areas around ChatGPT in particular and AI tools. And so what we're going to start with today is content. So content is an extremely broad term. So we're going to break it down for you and look at the different types of content that we create across marketing and how an expert can work with ChatGPT to really accelerate the process and improve the deliverables. My name is Ben Fitzpatrick. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Webprofits. Once again, I'm joined by Alex Cleanthous, co-founder of Webprofits and host of the Growth Manifesto podcast. Hey, Alex.
Hey, Ben. How are you?
Yeah, real good. So we're going to get into a bunch of different types of content today, but I want to start just by asking you kind of where you're most excited about ChatGPT and other AI tools driving content development.
I think from a content perspective, and this is something that we've been discussing internally, is what is Google's stance on content? Because I think there's content which you want to rank on Google, and there's content which you would share on social media, which you would use in ads, which you can use in email marketing campaigns and so on, right? And I think the more you can combine the different content types and so that the same piece of content can have a number of different outcomes. So it can rank on Google, it can be used in email marketing, it can be used in social media and so on. The more efficient and effective the effort which you put into content creation becomes.
Yeah.
And so, Ben, let me push this back to you, because I know that you've been doing a bit more analysis of the market around, what is Google's stance on AI generated content? Let's start with that, because then I can then talk to applications of it.
I mean, I think, we're still getting the full picture of Google's stance. It's becoming increasingly clear that some types of AI generated content or AI aided content, let's say, will almost certainly be fine from an SEO perspective. I think Google is moving towards, or potentially already has moved towards, there's some updates we've gotten from them that basically say great content is great content, and that's what we're going to be valuing. In my opinion, they don't have any choice. They're going to be driving AI content development eventually on their end as well. And to put rules against it in place is really kind of going to be moving against a whole cultural shift that they want to be at the forefront of. So I think there's been a huge discussion within the SEO community around how do we develop content that can get around the algorithm, if we're using AI tools. And I actually don't think that's going to be the big problem. I think the big problem is going to be everybody's going to be able to create a certain level of content. And so that level of content is just going to be completely useless now. And so it's actually, how do you create amazing content in the context of everyone now being able to level up what they're able to do? I think that's really where people should be more focused, and especially in terms of SEO. But this is a developing area for sure, and one that we'll learn more about week by week.
Yeah, and I think from what I saw, they said it's fine to use AI for content, just as long as all of the existing rules still apply, right? Yeah. So it has to be authoritative, it's going to be expert level, it has to add value, and so on. And with that being said, the perspective that we've had on this podcast and at Webprofits is that to get the full value out of ChatGPT, you need to have the expertise to be able to direct it. And I think from a content perspective, exactly the same thing. And to Google's point, if you're the expert, you know what a good piece of content should look like. It's easy enough for an expert to have a look at all the content online and create something that's a bit different or that's a bit more in depth and so on. And so to be an expert, that's the hard part, right? And that is the hardest part of this whole process. Now, if you're an expert, ChatGPT can help you construct an outline, can construct other sub-bullet points, and can actually construct the content itself. And then as the expert, then you just have to go and basically edit it, ensure it's exactly true, to add in a couple of examples if you have any, spend a bit of time editing it. But the hard work that was done before is now gone. Now, if we consider what the process had been in the past, right? Exactly everything I've said, but instead of the content actually being created through a copywriter, and oftentimes it's like an external copywriter, a freelance copywriter, they're not experts. And they're never going to be experts because their expertise is freelance copywriting, right? So like it is not on internet marketing. So it is not on property investment, or it is not on e-commerce specific, I say, for example, shampoo hair tips or whatever else it is, right?
Yeah.
And so they have never been the expert. And so now all we're really saying is that the freelance copywriters are now being replaced by the AI, which is better anyway, because it has a lot more context and content than a freelance copywriter has. And it's instant. It's in 10 minutes. It's in 15 minutes, right? So if we're thinking about the construction of the content itself and the process, and I'll keep coming back to the idea that the value for marketing and for business outside of development is in improving the workflows of outputs, right? Yeah. Is increasing the speed of creating something of value quickly. And that's what ChatGPT can do. So from a content creation perspective, like if you actually have a look at the steps involved in constructing a piece of content, the subject matter expert can do the whole thing essentially, right? And there's ways of approaching that process, but it is a process that experts can now take control of themselves, right? And I think that's the starting point, Ben.
Yeah. And I think that actually ties into a lot of what I want to talk about from here, which is a little bit about how to approach these different steps within that process and the different content that comes out of it. But I'm really happy that you framed everything around this idea of, something that has been a theme across content marketing and content for the last, 4 or 5 years at least, which is create something great and then use it across your marketing. And that is something that, ChatGPT in particular can actually really speed up, because once you have something that is great, getting it to, to build off that or create different versions of that, or short or long, or, whatever the case may be, like that's a really straightforward use case. So I think that's a really great frame, because, there might be a role for, the expert in shampoo advice, to create, that first piece, that we work off. And then there's so much that you can do with that and scale with that. So let's start with content planning. Pretty much every business, I think, is developing or every business that's been working in content marketing and SEO and email marketing develops something of a content plan, whether it's 3-6 month plan. How would you use ChatGPT to integrate with the workflow around content planning?
And so that's a great question. I think the first part of this is to really understand, so what is the goal of the content, right? Now, if the goal of the content is to rank on Google, which is the goal of a lot of pieces of content, then I would start by having a look at the keywords I want to own. Say, for example, if it's for ChatGPT, right? It could be the ultimate guide to ChatGPT for marketing. Cool. Right. And so then I have a look at all the pieces of content out there, right? And I'm starting off just with ideation of the topic, right? And so how do we now choose a keyword that we want to focus on? We have a look at the content that is existing on the top 10 search results in Google, and we see how do we create something that is better or that's a bit improved. Some way it could be shorter, it could be longer, it could be, just more, I guess, interactive potentially. And I'm creating the ideation in terms of the topics I want to create, right? And I think that's the first part, right? And I might create, say, 5 to 10 ideas of topic titles. Then I would have a look at all of the existing content out there and have a look at all of the areas that they are talking about, right? And I would start to create the outline of the article, right? The structure of the article, the first level down, right? And I would actually have a look at all the different parts. And then I would have a look at all the parts that are missing and I would expand on those. And then from there, like I would now start the bullet points in terms of the outline of the article. And then I would expand each of those into sub-bullet points and I would expand each of those into sub-bullet points, right? And now I've got the structure of the article itself, right? Now from here, I can now start to have a look at that structure and I can start to insert some opinions or some examples. I can start to really customize the outline of that article, right? And what I'm really spending the time on is actually the idea of the article, is the sections of the article, it's the information inside the article, it's any examples in the article and so on, right? Because this is the hard part of content, right? From that point, I could either pass it off to a freelancer, which I wouldn't do anymore, or I would actually create a point by point the content of the article, right? And now I want to start with the biggest piece of content I can create, right? A 10x guide, right? It is the best piece of content across the market on a particular subject, right? Because from there, I can now start to create some splinter articles, right? Some smaller pieces of content, say, for example, and have that as the resource, right? And so the big piece of content, it becomes the guide. I spend an inordinate amount of time on the first piece of content because that becomes the basis of all other pieces of content in terms of that specific topic area. So that's like a quick, rough workflow of how I would approach it.
So I think across this, there's going to be a number of places that ChatGPT immediately can be used. Like first, you talked about, finding the common themes across content that ranks on page one. Like one thing you could do is actually to copy a few of those articles into ChatGPT and be like, here's 3 articles that rank on page 1 of Google. Give me the common themes that you see across these kind of. That's a place where ChatGPT is really good at finding similarities between data, basically, which is all that is, and much better than people at that task, right? So like that's something you can do really fast, and just because what it sounds like to me here is the content marketer in you. That expertise is exactly what you are focused on. You're still creating a really clear outline, focusing on the structure of the content, focusing on what are going to be the key points. Where can I add something unique, like an opinion? We're going to come back to that for sure. So you've spent a lot of time, in building that out. I think there's like a number of places where ChatGPT can really speed that process up, but you're still spending the time there. Mm-hmm. And then what you're saying is once you get all that done, then you just, you can have it written really quickly. And then you're editing, right? Like, and editing is much easier than writing, as I think any writer knows.
We've received the confirmation from Google that it's fine to have AI support your content, right? And if you're the expert, well, then you know what is good content and then you know what it should say in it, right? And so If you're the expert, the content is good, if the structure is good, and if you know actually how to construct a good article, and that might be the hard part, right? But it's easy now. Well, it's easier now. I think the other part to think about is if you're not an expert in something, how do you know the thing that ChatGPT said is actually good or not, right? Because now all of a sudden is that, there are going to be people who are going to try to game the system, right? And say, hey, I just want to own basically all the content like in this area, right? But they don't know much about the area. And so they'll make a lot of content that may seem like it's good, but anyone who's in that industry will say that's wrong, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. And so I think there's going to be a level of quality control, which I don't know how Google is going to check, right? I definitely don't think it's going to be based on, this was constructed by AI, right? Because us mere mortals cannot tell if something is actually written, just by AI or a human anymore, right? Because all of other tools that we have access to, they're gameable, right? Now, Google's probably got, I'm sure that they have very sophisticated AI that will be able to see patterns and trends that we can't see, right? So it's going to be AI anyway, right? And so I think now the focus is how do you actually show expertise supported by ChatGPT?
Yeah. Well, that's great. So you heard it here. We're going to have an example of this, which we'll share in the show notes so that you can actually see what this looks like in action. So that's great. I mean, we've used ChatGPT not just for a content plan, but actually now built out something in depth. As a marketer, if you have an in-depth piece of content, let's just start with what are all the things that you would do with it?
Well, number one, I mean, I would be posting it to our blog because I wanted to rank on Google. I would be including it as part of email marketing. I would splinter it into like a bunch of smaller pieces of content. I would promote it across social media. It could be on LinkedIn. It could be on Facebook. It could be anywhere essentially, right? And so like I would just be promoting that piece of content out there like as much as possible. So it's exactly the same as what happened before ChatGPT, right?
Yes.
Just create the best content possible to rank on Google, promote it heavily across all the social media platforms and channels, and then continue that process, right? Like the right piece of content can create a lot of business for you, right? And this is the reason that we suggest promotion of content, right? But you have to create content that's that good that it's promotable and that if people consume it, they like your brand better. It's super helpful. They subscribe to the email subscriptions and so on, right? And they're part of the journey now, right? And now that same piece of content, it can be used to nurture people as well, right? And so it's part of email marketing. So it creates so many opportunities. And I don't think people need to be sold on content because I think content is something that everyone understands is a part of the customer journey. And there's different types of content across a certain stages of the customer journey, right? And so it's just the ability to create this content faster, but to create it at a deeper level than a freelance copywriter could. Because just think about the current processes right now. There could be some companies that have copywriters in-house, but there's not that many, right? And normally the process is get a freelance copywriter, but you can do what a freelance copywriter can do now, and it can take 10, 15 minutes, a couple of hours, let's say, but it's a couple of hours. It's not a couple of weeks because of the workflows of freelancers who have a lot of content that they're creating and they have to squeeze you in. So now instead of that, it's better to have a content strategist, right? Who can strategize the content, who knows actually how to use the content and actually can create the content and all the splinters of that specific piece of content as well. And this is the area that we're focusing on at Webprofits, because oftentimes the companies that we work with, they don't know how to construct a piece of content the best possible way and actually how to stand out effectively, and then how to splinter that into other pieces of content, and then how to maximize it across all platforms, right? And so there is a place for a content strategist now, because that is the hard part now, is actually is actually creating a piece of content that can win. And look, it's February right now in 2023, right? So right now, it'll be easy to stand out. But just imagine if this is the standard and there's a bunch of people out there, exactly like myself, who know how to construct this. Now, how do you stand out? Right? That's the point of a content strategist, right? And so right now, it's the simple days, right? Because there's still people who haven't even heard of ChatGPT and who are in marketing, which is completely baffling, right? To me. But soon that's going to change. And here's the part. It doesn't require too many content strategists to compete inside of a specific industry to make it really competitive, right? It's top 5 spots, right? And so then if there's going to be 50 brands all competing, there's top 5 spots, then it's the strategy that makes the difference, right? And so that's why I think the freelance industry is going to be struggling very heavily right now, because they don't have anything really that they add that an expert actually can't already create. And they're not content strategists who understand actually how to maximize it. And so all they are is an alternative now to ChatGPT. Maybe they can give it more style, possibly, although it depends if you find the right one, right? And depends how much you pay. A good freelance copywriter will charge you thousands of dollars to create a piece of content, thousands upon thousands, or you work with a content strategist and they create it through ChatGPT. Look, that was a really long explanation.
No. So
but
I do want to go back to one of the points from the start there, which is, and I'm going to flip it around rather than say, what could we use ChatGPT for? I'm going to say the opposite. So you've got this great piece of content that you've created. We know we're going to turn it into an email. We're going to create 5 different, splinter pieces of content on topics within it. We're going to promote it across social media. Maybe we'll even do some outreach to people that we want to just send it to. Is there anything in there that you couldn't do in 10 minutes, let's say 30 minutes in ChatGPT?
I think everything can be done in ChatGPT. I think the part that takes longer is the review process and the editing process, right? It's the same, say, for example, with Facebook ads, right? It can create tons of Facebook ads, right? And we've got some frameworks that can create a lot of pretty high quality ones, but you still need to select them and have a strategy overall, right? It's the same with email marketing, right? So I can say, all right, cool. So here's the piece of content I want to email about. Create me an email in this format, in this style, in this tone, in this length, with this angle, in this perspective, right? Boom, that's another 5 minutes, right? And that's now done. So it can all be done, but someone has to know how to actually to market it effectively, right? Like, it's not the same to be a subject matter expert than to be an experienced marketer, right? Which is why I keep talking to marketers saying this is an advantage right now for all marketers, but this advantage is not going to last very long, right? Because there are principles in marketing that will just help that piece of content just perform a lot better, right? It's the same with everything else, right? It's just that all of the value creation parts, right? The copywriting or the outlines or this or the construction of the email, right? That can be done now across ChatGPT, right? And I think that's the opportunity, but it's also a challenge, of course, right? Because it's not that easy to compete.
Well, no, I mean,
everyone actually has the same tool. It is
what's
right now, though. So just jump in fast, because right now it is.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, and this is a common theme now, is that, the same person, but also someone quite expert, is doing everything. And so, yes, we can get ChatGPT to write the email. We can get it to write all the, sub content that we need, the posts for social media, all that type of stuff we can get it to write. But that same expert still needs to be the quality assurance, and not even just quality assurance, like to level the content up even still, right? And add I think there's a number of different areas where that can happen. Part of it is just tone, right? Like, you do a ton of email marketing, you have a tone that is you, and if you were to somehow switch away from that because you've moved to AI content, that would actually be, a step back. And so there's lots of different elements like that this content strategist needs to be driving. And that's part of the brief, that you give to ChatGPT, but also part of the editing and follow-up. So what do you think are some of the areas that content strategists can now set content apart with? Because I think what we've talked about so far, like you said, there's a lot of good content strategists out there. I've worked with a lot of good content strategists, and they are not all at Webprofits anymore. So I'm confident that, there's going to be a lot of people out there that can get this to a certain level. And all of a sudden, that's just the baseline. That's the standard. And we need to find a way to jump up off that. So what do you think are some of the ways that content strategists really can improve upon what's now already pretty great content that we can create through ChatGPT?
Look, I think the first thing everyone should do is they should go to LinkedIn and subscribe to a guy called Brian Dean. He's been on the podcast. He shares a lot of information about how do you create content that stands out, and some of the things that he talks about, and we talked about it about a year or two ago, I think, on the podcast. It's got to be different. It should have some GIFs in there. It should have some things that help people stop, actually have a look at the content, right? It should have examples. It should have some case studies, right? It should be something that stands out from everyone else, right? It should have something maybe controversial in it, right? It should have something that is different. It doesn't have to be longer. It could be shorter. He was saying on the podcast as well. All right, cool. So if everyone has articles 10,000 words in length or 40,000 words in length, there's no point actually making them longer now, right? And so now you make them shorter and you make them a bit more interactive, right? So there's all these different ways to stand out. And what we're talking about is standing out, but continuing to add a ton of value. And so I think that's kind of how to think about it, right? The content has to be the best content, right? But the best content can be shown in many different ways. It doesn't have to be the longest. It doesn't have to be the shortest. It doesn't have to be the most well-designed or the least well-designed, right? It just has to be something that is different enough and valuable enough that it stands out and adds more value in some way than other pieces of content out there. If you're the subject matter expert, you will know what content stands out, but the content strategist will have ideas on the way that the content is published, the way that examples are spoken about, the kinds of images included in there, the length or the style or whatever, right? And so there's the content, and then there's how the content is delivered.
Yeah. And I think this is where, a lot of our approach to content over the years has moved to, 6-7 years ago, pretty much all content was created a fairly straightforward way, which was to go review all the content on the internet and find ways to kind of rewrite it in a new way of some sort. That hasn't worked for quite some time, because for really the same trend that we're talking about here, which is trying to find ways to add value, especially in just competitive spaces. And so what we are generally doing is interviewing, or engaging with people, at the businesses we work with to find those, really specific value adds that we can either base a whole piece of content around, or that we can build into content, that's already in development to make it, that much better. And so that hasn't changed. That just needs to get built into your workflow with ChatGPT, right? Both in briefing it, saying, here's a piece of unique content that we want to build in, but then also as you go through and kind of call out where you really have said something new and make sure that that's kind of the hero.
I was just going to say just quickly that the opportunity right now is that there aren't that many subject matter experts that are also great at content strategy, right?
Yeah.
So we have processes at Webprofits on how we extract expertise from other companies that we work with. And so it can show them, I guess, as experts, but it's us that actually creating it, because a lot of subject matter experts, they're too busy to write content. And so they need somebody to help them. And so I'm suggesting that that person who helps you should be really good at the content strategy side of things and should be experimenting very heavily on the ChatGPT side of things, right? That's the advantage right now. That advantage is not going to last long, but there's not that many subject matter experts that are also marketing experts, right? So there's a gap right now. That gap is opportunity.
I want to end on an area that I feel like I'm quite uncertain around, and I'm really interested to hear kind of what your thinking is, which is sales copy. Now, both of us are big believers in the value of great copy, and that when you are trying to do something hard, sell a product, generate leads for a service, engage someone on a new category, that they don't know about, there's a certain level of copy required to do that, which stands out dramatically from all other copy on the internet. Now, we have maybe a couple sales copywriters, even in Australia, that we would even work with to achieve that level of content. And so where do you think that fits into this whole discussion at the moment?
Sales copy, hey? Sales copy is an interesting one, right? Because sales copy does have a lot of skill and expertise in how do you influence somebody to take action, right? Now, saying that statement, there aren't that many industries, products, or areas anymore where a single piece of content is going to drive all of the revenue, right? This is not like 30, 40 years ago when like a good sales letter, you'd pump it out to everyone and like it would just keep working, right? We're now in a world of multi-touch attribution. Like there's like a lot of places that a consumer is going to engage with a brand before they purchase, right? And so we spend all the time on like an email. It's not about the email. It's about the framework around the email nowadays, right? That's what I believe. And as long as you're saying the right things to consumers at the right stage of the journey, right? And you have a few examples of frameworks or of structures or things like that, you can get close enough and then you can customize it again, right? Now, again, like it's important to have the frameworks. It's important to know, all right, cool. So this is actually how do you structure an effective email, right? Or this is actually how you find a hook. Or these are examples of hooks in headlines. Or these are examples of hooks like that, right? But like a landing page, say, for example, for Facebook, isn't the same as a landing page for search. I say, for example, like for search, they're already searching. So now I don't need to sell you on the product. I just need to sell you on the fact that they should choose our company A instead of companies like B, C, D, E, and F, right? And so it's a different example again. And the hard way again is, oftentimes you'd hire a copywriter, a sales copywriter, an expensive sales copywriter.
Yeah.
You wouldn't give them the right type of brief, and they would write a sales letter for a Facebook style intent versus a search intent, and that doesn't work on search, right? So look, sales copy is super important, right? Sales copy is something that if you're not good at sales copywriting, you won't know if it's good or not because it all kind of sounds good, right?
Yeah.
And so I do think that ChatGPT can help a lot, but maybe it only helps you to 70%, not to 90%, right? It can get you still closer, but maybe that last part requires that level of expertise that you can't guess. The ChatGPT can't find for you, right? I don't think it can easily create slogans or brands or emotional type of copy easier unless it's something which you specifically direct it, right? Yeah. If you can provide specific inputs, the output is going to come back pretty good. And again, this is the theme, this is the theme, this is the theme. It's for experts. Yeah. If you're not an expert and there's an expert who you're competing against, you're never going to win because that expert just knows how to get a lot more out of it, right?
But I think you've pinpointed an important element here, which is that a content strategist, most content strategists are not necessarily a sales copy expert. That is actually, those are two different people most of the time.
Definitely different.
And don't conflate the two because sales copy it's something that takes a career.
Well, it's persuasion. It's persuasion. Yeah. So sales copy is persuasion and content is education / information, right?
Totally. Yeah,
good sales copy is also education and persuasion, right? And that's what's so hard about it, right? Is that it's persuading people to spend money with you, which is very, very different to here's some information about how ChatGPT works, which also persuades them, but not directly.
And I think this is where, for sales copywriters, actually, I think that's the opportunity is they have expertise that is required. If they integrate with ChatGPT, they can really scale up that expertise and deliver significantly more, copy, but really value, right? And so that's where, that is a type of expertise that is required to create this content through ChatGPT. Now, one thing I would say is, in the past, you might have had your sales copywriter write the landing page, the email, the social, all this different stuff. Personally, I would say have them write the one hero piece if that's the route that you go, and then you can use that to create lots of other stuff. Again, if you have a level of expertise, to again know what's good enough in that. So there still are, even if you're going to keep your existing workflow of using a sales copywriter, there's probably ways that you can still cut that down, both on the cost side and the time side, and really scale up what you get out of each investment you make in copy.
And I'd like to just share a personal opinion, and this is advice to copywriters, to freelance copywriters, who are both on the content side of things and the sales copy side of things, right?
Yeah.
Listen to everything I've said and think about this is the conversation that is happening in companies right now. And you've heard the areas that are of value, and you've heard the areas of how we approach it with our own clients as well, right? And if you can be that person who can actually create the framework quickly, right? Who can do the research extremely well, who understands content strategy and the marketing side of things, not the words. Words don't really mean anything anymore. I mean, of course they mean everything, but that's not where the value is anymore. The value is in the strategic thinking, is in the marketing of it, is in kind of how many ways a piece of content is actually used to achieve an outcome. And so that, from the time invested to the content actually being live is quick. And so it's higher value. So it could still be charged enough because of the value of it, but the thinking is across much more of the marketing side of things, right? I think that's the place in. And as a copywriter now you can fix it up at the end because it's just like yourself, because that's the strength that you already had before is on the writing and maybe the tone side of things. And that's, I think, a future that is valuable, right? I think if there is anything that can be done by ChatGPT as close to what you do as possible, I would be rethinking how I'm going to approach the future right now, because it's just going to become harder, not easier.
And I think that's a great place to end, first of all, with just direct advice to copywriters, because obviously that's an area that's already just being directly disrupted and a large segment of people that work in marketing, right? There is a way forward. I would also urge you to listen to the previous, one of the previous episodes where we talk about really, what you have control of and actually focusing on what you have control of and building off of that. We'll leave it there for today. We're going to try to go more in depth like this, on a number of topics moving forward, because I really do want to provide specific value for marketers around how they can get, be building ChatGPT into their business beyond just kind of the overall approach. We're going to talk about that as well, but I just don't want to. I want to make sure this podcast does not go down this generic route that so much media and content is right now. There's a real opportunity, and the only way we're going to make the most out of it is if we go deep. So, Alex, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ben.
And for everyone listening, please do go follow the Growth Manifesto podcast. You will learn a ton about business and marketing there. Alex, do you have another recommended episode for people to check out?
For sure. You should check out the Brian Dean episode, the one I spoke about earlier on in this podcast, because he will give you the thinking of how to make content that actually really stands out. Apply that thinking, right, to the processes that we were talking about here, right? I think that's going to be a great
I love that. And as
piece of content to match this.
As a former SEO myself, Brian Dean's always been a hero. So I'm just a big fan. That's a great episode to go check out for sure. Wherever you're listening, please like or follow the Strategy Led podcast so you don't miss an episode. We're going to continue to learn a lot and have a lot of fun, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.